In 1848, men established the right to vote, also called universal male suffrage. Women, however, struggled with achieving suffrage. Queen Victoria thought the fight for suffrage was a mad, wicked folly. Women who wanted suffrage differed in ways to claim it. Women suffragettes in England had to do whatever it took to secure the right to vote.
The suffragettes wanted the right to vote. Suffrage means having the right to vote. The suffragettes, like the suffragists, were largely recruited from the educated middle class. The movement toward equality of the sexes was part and parcel of the movement towards general equality of the classes. The suffragettes started off relatively peacefully because of their plan to have patience and local arguments. The members of the original National Union of Societies were known as suffragists. They held meetings and issued propaganda and kept within the law. The union became better known as the Suffragettes. Members of the Suffragettes were prepared to use violence to get whatever they wanted. This was the beginning of a campaign of the like which was never known in England, or for that matter in any other country.
The women's suffrage movement in Great Britain went through dramatic changes during the first years of the 20th century. Different groups reacted to the movement in various ways. Women wanted an act of parliament giving the women the vote and did not want to be enfranchised simply as an afterthought in a bill, primarily concerned with giving men more votes. Parliament resisted the demands of women's suffrage. The first part of the suffragettes' campaign chiefly directed itself against the cabinet ministers and the House of Commons. Another argument against women entering politics was that they were so naturally individualistic that they would find it impossible to cooperate with one another and organize themselves properly.
Many men asked how women could even reach the goal of making their own party. While a number of distinguished public men, mostly radicals or socialists, were in complete sympathy with the suffragettes, masculine opinion in general increasingly hardened against them. People felt very threatened by them because they were stepping out of their sphere, and people were very angry and took it as a rather personal challenge. The English reformer Emmeline Pankhurst, from 1858 to 1928, fought for women's rights and led to the movement for women's suffrage in Great Britain. Pankhurst was a lady of immense determination, considerable speaking skill, and did whatever it took to reach her goal.
Emmeline wanted votes for women in England. Her interest in rights for women began when she was 14 years old and attended suffrage meetings. Her campaign drew worldwide attention. Many angry women left the suffragettes. On October 10th, 1903, the first meeting of the Women's Social and Political Union, WSPU, took place, which later became known as the Suffragettes. They collected petitions and organized huge public demonstrations.
By the 1900s, she was convinced that aggressive tactics would only bring victory. Pankhurst thought hostility was more useful than indifference. The women interrupted speakers and organized stone throwing. In October 1905, Pankhurst was arrested and jailed for disturbing a political meeting in Manchester. Pankhurst fought her cause from the streets, prison cells, and in the courtrooms, while going on 10 hunger strikes within 18 months. Under Pankhurst's leadership, the WSPU became more extreme and violent. A small number of people became suffragettes and did anything to make their point clear. Emmeline Pankhurst had no regard for her health, her safety, or her life itself, if they had to be sacrificed for the cause. Christabel Pankhurst was a convincing answer to anyone who thought the suffragettes were dull or dowdy. She was very obviously good-looking. She had immense vitality and had her mother's skill as a speaker. It was not quite so clear that she was a lady. Sylvia Pankhurst was certainly not a lady. At first she wanted to be an art student, and then she became convinced that something would have to be done for the poor. Because she was a Pankhurst, she was a suffragette, but she was one of the few members of the WSPU who remembered that it had started off as a socialist organization and felt that it ought not to become a feminist group with no other political commitments. This caused trouble later, but in the first of the WSPU's internal struggles, she was firmly on her mother's side. It had to be done for the poor. Because she was a Pankhurst, she was a suffragette, but she was not one of the few members of the WSPU who remembered that it started off as a socialist organization, and
they were fed up with government delay and betrayal, which made them adopt more violent ways. They broke the law and damaged public property. WSPU used hammers and smashed shop windows in Piccadilly Circus, Regent, and Oxford Streets. 2 women threw stones through the Prime Minister's window on June 30th, 1908. The WSPU women put their lives at risk. They claimed that they chained themselves on gates and on railings. One woman even threw herself in front of the king's horse. Many of the women were mistreated by authority, put into penitentiaries, and ended up starving themselves for the vote.
The women were arrested and sent to prison. Many were for minor infractions. Suffragettes were beaten back from fights and roughly thrown between police and men in the crowd, causing many to be injured. The suffragettes were quite happy to be sent to jail and went on hunger strikes. They began doing this in 1909 to promote the idea of risking their lives for the equality for women.
Suffragettes continued to be arrested and jailed throughout this period for many minor infractions. In July 1909, after being denied her requests to be treated as a political prisoner, Marjorie Wallace Doplin began a hunger strike to protest women's treatment in prison. New prisoners also refused to eat. At first, they were released when they became dangerously weak, but in September, prison authorities began to force-feed women to keep them from starving themselves. It left women sore, nauseous, and barely nourished, and by the end of 1909, nearly 500 women had been imprisoned. News of their torments filled the papers and won the suffragettes wider support.
Parliament finally came around to the idea of women's right to vote. In 1918, Parliament finally granted suffrage to the women over the age of 30. Young women did not win the right to vote for another decade. After 1918, women attained the most absolute equality in theory, though they did not achieve political suffrage on completely equal terms with men until the Sex Disqualification Removal Act of 1919 opened all profession to them. This did not include the Church of England and the Stock Exchange. In conclusion, radical suffragettes in England would go to the greatest lengths to gain the right to vote. Many people and groups opposed this right. They did not want women to be looked upon as equals. Emmeline Pankhurst, the leading suffragist, led a revolt to carry out the mission of securing women in England the right to vote. The suffragettes became very extreme in order to vote. They were jailed and their health decreased, which promoted awareness to the suffragist movement. It took over 15 years of determination and effort for the Parliament to give the women in England what they wanted: suffrage.